IGN just gave Mixtape a 10 out of 10 score, whilst a game like Crimson Desert gets a 6 out of 10. Make it make sense. One game is a soft, coming-of-age story, a light narrative experience. A game that has some people rightfully calling out the fact that it barely has any gameplay to begin with. And that's the game. That's the game that IGN says, this is our perfect game so far. It is the first 10 out of 10 score game of the year, mind you. And all the other review outlets actually seem to think the same thing. Meanwhile, a game like Crimson Desert, boasting awesome combat, systems, spectacle, technical ambition, gets a solid 6. Is it hard to believe as to why people are upset about this? Now, I don't actually think that the real problem here is the fact that IGN gave Mixtape a 10 out of 10. I actually think that the deeper issue here is that review scores in and of themselves look simple, but the judgment behind them is extremely complicated. And this is the part where things get really interesting. Now, why do I say that? Gamers are sensing something real here. They may not have the vocabulary to explain it, but there is something actually going on beneath the surface here. Now, I watched IGN's review of Mixtape, the whole thing, and I get where the guy is coming from. The guy wasn't necessarily judging Mixtape like the same way you would judge a Taken game or a Doom game or even Elden Ring. He was judging the game as a coming-of-age story, a nostalgic experience. A game about mood, character, memory, style, that beautiful Into the Spider-Verse artwork or art style. So from that angle, I can kinda get how he would come up with a score like that. Because if you're going to review a game like Mixtape that thrives on an emotional mixtape and it manages to hit every single note, then the score actually does make sense within that lane. The problem comes whereby players start to judge the game from a completely different lane altogether. They're asking questions like, where is exactly the gameplay? Where is the challenge? Where is the agency? Where is the mechanical depth? And those are really fair questions because for many gamers, the word game implies choice, agency, challenge, friction, failure, player expression, all the things that we actually associate with what a game is actually supposed to be. So when you see a game like Mixtape getting a 10 out of 10, naturally the question that you ask is, so is IGN saying that Mixtape is a better game than Crimson Desert? It's a better game than Metal Gear Solid 5? It's basically the next Red Dead Redemption 3. That's what GTA 6 is basically supposed to strive toward? Is that what IGN is saying? I think that this is simply another case of domain dependence or category error, like we already discussed it a few minutes ago while we were talking about the DLS5 thing that was happening. But just for a quick refresher, domain dependence is basically, it's almost like saying that just because one thing works in one area doesn't necessarily mean that the same thing will work in another area. Just because you're extremely good at astrophysics doesn't necessarily mean that that same level of academic excellence will carry over to your politics. A game can have beautiful storytelling, strong mood, awesome soundtrack, but extremely cooked when it comes to engaging mechanical systems. So then the actual question doesn't just become, is Mixtape actually good? The question is, good at what exactly? And unfortunately, that is the question that the review scores hide. They don't tell us that part. Is it good as a story, a game, a mechanical challenge, emotional experience, technical achievement, a player-driven sandbox? What exactly is this game good at? And because the review scores don't tell us these things, we then fall into domain dependence errors, or we start to make category errors. People see Mixtape getting a 10 out of 10 while Crimson Desert gets a 6, and we treat those numbers as if those numbers are measuring the exact same thing, which is honestly kind of ridiculous, because it's almost the same thing as basically judging how fast a fish can climb a tree. Sure, a fish may be excellent in the water, but when it comes to climbing trees, it's completely useless. You get what I'm saying? The fish is not bad. It's just being judged unfairly, or out of context, or outside of its appropriate field. So, Mixtape might actually be really good in the field of coming-of-age stories, music, nostalgia, But if you judge it in the domain of combat systems, agency and challenge, mechanical depth, then of course it looks ridiculous. Crimson Desert is judged in the field of technical ambition, world design, combat, and action game execution. But IGN score is out here making them look as if they're the exact same thing. And that is precisely the problem. Because this is where things get really dangerous for IGN. You see, review scores don't stay inside the review anymore. The second the number goes live, the entire internet reacts. Twitter reacts, Reddit reacts, YouTubers react, streamers react. Old memes come back. People start to compare scores. People start to argue about whether game journalists even know what gaming journalism is all about. Do they even know how to play games these days? And before you know it, the conversation is longer about mixtape. It's about damaged trust. You see, the difference between a simple system and a complex system is that in a simple system, if you press a light switch, the light turns on. If you put your dirty clothes in the washing machine, they come out clean. Simple systems are predictable. But when it comes to something like gaming discourse, it's a completely different story. Because gaming culture is alive. It reacts emotionally. It remembers. It carries resentment, preferences. So when IGN is out here posting a score, the response to that becomes extremely unpredictable. It is like one review will then turn into 10 different arguments. Arguments such as, do critics value story over gameplay? Are indie games treated softer than AAA games? Can one score even compare two completely different games? Can a game with barely any gameplay really be a 10? And that's why the backlash exploded the way it just has. Because it's not about us just disagreeing. We disagree all the time. Some of us say God of War 2018 is a much better game than Ragnarok. Some of us also argue that Red Dead Redemption 2 was supposed to take Game of the Year back in 2018. So we argue all the time. The reason as to why this became bigger than it was supposed to is the fact that this score is already launching into a community that already distrusts IGN to begin with. And when you have a reputation that is that fragile, we basically get another Marathon Bungie situation. And me personally, I honestly don't blame people for being this mad at IGN. IGN has been doing this thing for years. It's just that for this time, it was really egregious. Sure, I mean, gamers may not necessarily have the language to express their disdain. They say things like, mixtape is basically a walking simulator, critic bait game, movie game, a paid review. Some of that rhetoric, if we're being honest, is a bit unfair. But the real point that is being hinted at is that gamers are able to see that these scores are pretending to be cleaner than they actually are. They're able to sense that a 10 out of 10 from mixtape cannot possibly mean the same thing as a 10 out of 10 for RDR2 or God of War. And they're essentially right, because those games basically those scores live in completely different worlds. But IGN's format makes them look completely the same. And that is the thorn in our side. I'm not out here saying that reviewers can't review the games that they love. The issue is that your score doesn't explain the excellence that is actually being critically acclaimed here. So then how should outlets' reviews work? Now, if it was up to me and I was king for a day, I wouldn't outlaw the scores at all. They are useful. People like them and they're quick and they get the signal across pretty fast. But the only thing that they're missing is context. So if I were IGN, instead of giving you a score that says 10 out of 10, I would say Mixtape gets a 10 out of 10 as a narrative coming of age experience. Or it gets a 10 out of 10 based on the music, mood, characters, and emotional execution. You see, that already changes almost everything. You can still argue, right? At least now we are arguing an actual standard, not just a mystery number that we just came up with. But unfortunately for IGN, their scores breed resentment, score comparisons, suspicion. It stops being just one review and instead becomes a referendum on IGN, on gaming journalists as a whole. And that is why with each and every single review that will come out from IGN, it will always ignite the seething fury within the hearts and minds of gamers.